Chinese diplomats in Fiji crashed Taiwan's National Day party. That's not all they're doing to challenge Taiwan in the Pacific. Welcome back to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. There was a major diplomatic incident between China and Taiwan this month in Fiji. What happened? Well, it's a bit of a he said, she said situation. According to Taiwan, 2 Chinese diplomats crashed a Taiwanese National Day party in Fiji on October 8th. I believe we have a picture of the 2 Chinese diplomats in question. Anyway, the party crashing led to a fist fight in Fiji, also known as a stoush, a scuffle, a fracas. Newspapers love a good old-fashioned fracas. Anyway, the fight was serious enough to land a Taiwanese official in the hospital with a concussion. So why did these Chinese diplomats crash Taiwan's National Day party? Well, Taiwanese officials say that the Chinese diplomats were trying to photograph the people who were there. Beijing has deployed such tactics, turning up at events, taking photographs of people in recent years to intimidate its rivals and those who support them. When the Taiwanese staff tried to stop them from taking photographs, the Chinese diplomats assaulted them. Of course, Beijing totally denies this.
First of all, Taiwan has no so-called diplomats in Fiji. The relevant report you mentioned is totally inconsistent with the facts. Taiwan is like a thief crying, "Stop, thief!"
Yeah, there aren't any so-called Taiwanese diplomats in Fiji, which means we couldn't have so-called punched them in their so-called faces. In fact, those Taiwanese diplomats who don't exist punched us in the face first. Chinese authorities are saying that the Taiwanese acted provocatively against the Chinese embassy staff, causing injuries and damage to 1 Chinese diplomat. So how did those Chinese diplomats get there in the first place? Well, they totally didn't crash Taiwan's party. They were just carrying out their official duties in the public area outside the function venue. Official duties that may or may not have included secretly photographing people going into the venue and trying to crash Taiwan's party. In any case, since Taiwan is part of China, that means this Taiwanese party is actually a Chinese party, which means that the Chinese diplomats weren't crashing, they were just going to their own party. Everyone knows the best party is a communist party. But the Chinese Foreign Ministry wants the world to know that the real problem isn't the party crashing. The real problem is the cake. That's because a false national flag was openly displayed at the scene. The cake was also marked with a false national flag, according to spokesman Zhao Lijian. I believe that Zhao is saying that the cake is a lie. In the end, police were called to the event, but the Chinese officials claimed diplomatic immunity. The actions of the Chinese diplomats in Fiji are part of China's increasingly aggressive wolf warrior diplomacy, as well as the Chinese Communist Party's increasing threats to Taiwan. But that's not the whole story. What happened in Fiji is also about China's growing attempts to dominate the Pacific. I'll tell you how after this short break. Welcome back. China's fracas over a Taiwanese cake in Fiji is just a small part of the Communist Party's attempts to dominate the Pacific. Fiji is located here in the South Pacific, a short flight away from Australia. Fiji is an archipelago of more than 300 islands. It's most famous for its abundant natural resources, like bottled water. Fun fact, Fiji used to be known as the Cannibal Isles. I imagine they changed the name because it was hard to get tourists. Welcome to the Cannibal Isles. We're here to serve you. Anyway, Fiji was one of the first Pacific nations to recognize the People's Republic of China back in 1975. The relations between Fiji and the Chinese Communist Party really started warming up back in 2006 after the current Prime Minister of Fiji, Frank Bainimarama, seized power in a military coup. China didn't criticize the coup. In fact, they increased their aid to Fiji dramatically, from $1 million to $161 million within 2 years. Chinese leader Xi Jinping has personally met with Bainimarama several times, including during a state visit to Fiji in 2014. During that visit, they signed 5 agreements as part of China's Pacific Engagement Strategy. Fiji is also part of China's Belt and Road Initiative. In just the last 5 years, China has invested more than $1 billion in Fiji, mostly in infrastructure projects, like these Fiji-China friendship bridges. Yeah, they really cemented the bilateral friendship. Hey, Xinhua, I'm the one who makes punny jokes around here. Stay in your lane. Fiji also became the first Pacific island nation to get a loan from China's Infrastructure Investment Bank. There have been some hiccups along the way, like a Chinese mega resort that destroyed a local reef and then had its building rights revoked. But overall, the relationship between Fiji and China has gotten even closer after the coronavirus outbreak. Chinese state-run media are talking about speeding up construction projects in Fiji. Fiji does not have official diplomatic relations with Taiwan, but Taiwan does have a de facto embassy in Fiji, the Taipei Trade Office. And their National Day celebration, the one that sparked the literal diplomatic fight, was attended by Fiji government ministers, opposition leaders, and prominent business people. So it's easy to see why the Chinese diplomats were so eager to figure out who was at the party, eating that delicious, delicious cake. In fact, Taiwan's influence is one of the big reasons that the Chinese Communist Party is more interested in the Pacific. More on that after the break. Welcome back. Taiwan is a key reason why the Chinese Communist Party is interested in the Pacific. Although frankly, we are running out of parts of the globe where China does not have an interest. But 4 of the 15 countries that officially recognize Taiwan are in the Pacific: Nauru, Palau, the Marshall Islands, and Tuvalu. Last year, the Chinese Communist Party managed to get 2 Pacific countries to switch diplomatic relations from Taiwan to China: the Solomon Islands and Kiribati. Thanks to China's diplomatic application of lots and lots of money. There's a lot more going on with China and these Pacific nations than I can fit into this episode. Let me know if I should do an episode on that topic. But broadly speaking, the Pacific is one place that Taiwan and China compete heavily for influence, especially because Taiwan can afford to give more aid to these smaller Pacific countries. Remember, no matter how big or small a country is, it gets 1 vote in the United Nations. And the Pacific Ocean happens to be a great place to build naval bases. But it's not just Taiwan that's worried about China's increasing role in the Pacific. Australia and New Zealand are also nervous about China's gaining influence in their own backyard, in case China decides to turn the 9- line into the 19- line, or for that matter, the 90- line. That's one reason both Australia and New Zealand are competing with China for influence in the South Pacific as well. For example, Australia outbid China to fund a military base in Fiji, and the United States is paying attention too. After all, the U.S. not only has territory in the Pacific, it also has many military bases in the region. Last month, Palau, which recognizes Taiwan and not China, invited the U.S. to build a military base on their islands as well. That's after U.S. Defense Secretary Mark Esper visited Palau and accused Beijing of being a malign influence in the region. And Beijing is the big reason that the U.S. has just released its 2020 Pacific Pledge. It's a pledge to give more than $200 million of funding to the Pacific Islands, including $130 million to support the response to COVID-19. So, expect to see growing diplomatic rivalries in the Pacific over the next few years, between China and Taiwan, Australia, New Zealand, and the United States. Sounds like it's going to be a real party. Pass the cake. And now it's time for me to answer a question from one of you, a fan who supports China Uncensored on the crowdfunding website Patreon. Bill asks, Do you think the U.S. should sell F-35 fighter planes to Taiwan, thus giving Taiwan the ability to remove all Chinese airplanes from its airspace? Taiwan might send a message to the CCP, "Don't tread on me." Well, Bill, it's complicated. 2 years ago, Taiwan had wanted to buy F-35 stealth fighter jets from the U.S., but they stopped requesting that last year and asked for F-16 fighters instead. The U.S. just finalized that sale 2 months ago. Why did Taiwan stop asking for the F-35s? The Air Force turned its back on pursuing the F-35B short takeoff vertical landing fighter due to a recent Taiwan National Security Council report. It indicated the stealth fighter was too exorbitant and untested in real combat to be a pragmatic choice for Taiwan. There was also concern that the U.S. might not sell the F-35 to Taiwan for security reasons. But some experts say that Taiwan still needs the F-35, since they don't have any stealth fighter jets. And a former Deputy Undersecretary of Defense has suggested that instead of selling F-35s to Taiwan, the U.S. should lease them. The idea would be that the planes would be leased to Taiwan but would stay in the U.S. That way they could be a deterrent to China, but China wouldn't be able to spy on the F-35s or attack them since they wouldn't be physically in Taiwan. It's an interesting idea. Thanks for your question, Bill. And if you'd like me to respond to your question or comment on the show, join what I call the China Uncensored 50-Cent Army and support us in the battle against the Chinese Communist Party. You can join for as little as $1 per episode on the crowdfunding website, Patreon. You'll also get some other cool perks as well. Head over to patreon.com/China Uncensored to learn more. Link is below. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.